Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm showing you a perfect for fall recipe. There's fresh apples in season, and so I'm gonna show you a little twist on an apple pie. It might be very unfamiliar to some viewers, but it's kind of a New England thing. It's an apple and cheddar pie. It uses this cheddar cheese butter crust. I'm gonna use Kerrygold butter and Kerrygold aged cheddar. You can also use this crust recipe for like any kind of savory galette. And when it comes together, it gives you that sweet, salty hit that I love so much. It's incredibly delicious. Apple picking is so fun. I love it so much. And you know, fresh apples are really special. I think we're so used to cold storage apples. It's like if you buy apples in June, they've been sitting in the supermarket for like 8 to 10 months because apples are really a late summer, early fall thing. So to have fresh apples and to be able to make apple pie with fresh apples is really exciting. So if you're thinking ahead to Thanksgiving and you're like trying to bring, if you're like going to a potluck or something and you're gonna bring dessert, this is kind of a fun one. Ingredients. I have 3 pounds of, these are Honeycrisp apple. I'll talk about like what makes a good baking apple. For the filling, I have some demerara sugar, cornstarch is my thickener, a little bit of cinnamon. I'm not making this a heavily spiced pie because I don't want it to compete too much with like that cheddar flavor. In the filling, I also have some heavy cream. I'm gonna talk about what I'm gonna do with that. It's really cool. Then my liquid additions to the filling, some apple cider vinegar, cocktail bitters, and vanilla extract. For finishing the pie, I have an egg, more demerara sugar, and I'm gonna add a little splash of heavy cream to my egg wash. And then for the crust, I'm kind of going in reverse order. I have some all-purpose flour, sugar, salt, some aged Kerrygold cheddar right here, 2 sticks of Kerrygold unsalted butter, and behind me some ice water. As for any fruit pie, it's a process. There's like just a lot of steps and a kind of order of operation. So, and I do have like a decent amount of, you need like a lot of like little gadgety kind of things. So I have behind me all my special equipment, pie plate, you need a lined baking sheet. I'm gonna do a lattice crust. So I have like a wheel cutter, a pastry brush, my rolling pin right here. I am gonna use the food processor for the dough. You don't have to use it. You could do it by hand, but it just makes it really, really fast. And a saucepan, because I'm going to cook the cream. That's a whole separate thing I'm going to show you. And what else? A big bowl for the filling. I think most people know Kerrygold butter, and if you've seen any of my videos, you've seen me use it in countless recipes. It has incredible creamy texture. I love using it in pastry like I'm going to show you today because it rolls out into sheets and creates an incredible flaky texture, plus you get this intense buttery flavor. I love browning it. It has all these milk solids. It just makes the most delicious baked goods. But if you're not familiar with Kerrygold cheese, you should really check it out. They make incredible aged cheddar. They make a really unique cheese called Dubliner that has like a little bit of a sweet flavor and creamy texture. I had more cheese, but it already got eaten today accidentally. We were snacking on it with apple and cheese, which is such a good combination, and it actually inspired the recipe I'm gonna make today, which is an apple cheddar pie. The crust, which has both Kerrygold cheddar and butter in it, is so flaky. It has this great savory, salty edge from the cheese. It really is my butter of choice for all uses, baking, but also just kind of eating on toast, having on a bagel. Because you can find it at basically any national grocery chain, the results are gonna be so reliable. So if you use it in one of my recipes, I'm very confident that it's gonna turn out because I test all my recipes with Kerrygold. So if you wanna learn more about Kerrygold products, you can go to the link in the description below. And I wanna thank Kerrygold for sponsoring the episode. Let's get back to the recipe. Typically I would start with my crust, but I already made a swap for the crust. So I wanna start with my apples because anytime I'm making a fruit pie filling, almost without fail, I am doing some kind of pre-cooking to reduce the amount of liquid. And that's because I don't want like a soupy wet pie with soggy bottom crust. So I want to let the apples macerate, meaning like sit with the sugar and draw out the juices, because then I'm going to reduce it. So I'm going to start with the apples. The longer you can let them sit, the better. Like you could throw them in the fridge overnight and let them sit that way. I have my apples here. This is 3 pounds of apples. I'm using Honeycrisp. These are local apples. So try to use, like if you go apple picking and you have like 50 pounds of apples, this is a great use. So these are Honeycrisp. And you want any very, very firm apple that has good sweet tart balance. So not too sweet. You could use Granny Smith, which has definitely like more acid, less sweetness, which is great, but just nothing too sweet because you want that kind of contrast. And years ago, I was apple picking and I was talking to an apple farmer who told me a trick for determining the freshness and like firmness and like suitability of baking apples, and I'll show it to you. So if you grasp an apple in your palm, like fully in your palm, and you try to press down with your thumb and make an indentation in the flesh, like I can't do it. And you'll notice that if you have like a cold storage apple that's been around a long time, it's very, very easy to like press into the flesh. So that is a sign that this is like not only a super fresh apple, but just like a very, very firm flesh apple, which is what you want. So generally speaking, the firmer it is, the more it's gonna hold its shape during baking. I tend to feel like the fastest peeling method is to do a ring around the North Pole and the South Pole, and then go like lengthwise all the way around. And then just for efficiency, like peel all the apples first, core all the apples, then slice all the apples. If you're new here, not only should you look at all my other apple videos, but you should hit that subscribe button. Is there a subscribe button?
Big time.
Okay. Okay.
You ever been on YouTube?
No. You know where I'm on YouTube a lot is how do I work this baby thing? How does this car seat install? Thank goodness for that. Anyone that's ever put like a how to assemble this baby gadget thing on YouTube, thank you for your service. I'm gonna slice them into sort of like 1/4 inch thick slices, and I'm gonna get them in my bowl.
This is how I cut apples now.
Right? It's just way more efficient. I'll do all the coring, and then I'll do the slicing all at once.
Do you ever feel bad for the cores?
No, but like I'll like.
That's what I, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do that out of guilt.
Yeah. I didn't really core the apples. I basically just cut the flesh away from the core on like 4 sides. And now when I'm slicing, it doesn't really matter if you slice like lengthwise or crosswise, and I'm just cutting them into kind of 1/4 inch thick slices, but not being terribly precise. It doesn't really matter. I just don't want them too thick or too thin. So 1/4 inch is kind of in the middle. And I'm getting them into my bowl. And we're gonna toss the apples with the sugar and spices and my like those little like liquid flavoring ingredients, and then let them macerate. So actually by mixing them with those with the sugar and the liquids, they don't brown. So don't worry about that. I let the apples, so I made a swap last night, and I let the apples sit and macerate for several hours just because I was doing other things, and they did not brown, which was great. Here's my 3 pounds of sliced apples. I'm going to add, this is 2/3 of a cup of demerara sugar. You can use either granulated or just regular brown sugar or a mix. Then a pinch of kosher salt. I have a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Try to use some new cinnamon, especially if you're entering baking season. And now I'm gonna add those liquid ingredients. I'm gonna do 2 teaspoons each of vanilla extract. Then 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar. I often use lemon juice in an apple pie, but apple cider vinegar made from apples helps to stop everything from browning, adds a little acid, and I like the flavor a little bit better with the cheddar crust compared to lemon. Now this is sort of an optional ingredient. This is orange bitters, like a cocktail bitter, and it's kind of like adding soy sauce to a recipe in a way. It's like an aged, very complex, Archie. I really like adding bitters to fruit pie filling. It just kind of adds like a slightly bitter flavor enhancer, and you don't really know it's there, but it's just kind of in the background, like making everything pop. So optional, but if you have it, it's a fun thing to add. So 2 teaspoons. So the 2 ingredients I'm not adding yet in my filling are, Archie, seriously. 2 ingredients, oh my God, Archie. Okay.
Lemon, Harris.
Yeah, seriously.
Archie, come on.
There we go. Okay. So the 2 ingredients I'm holding back for my filling are, I have 2/3 of a cup of heavy cream and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So I'll explain why I'm gonna hold that back. But for now, we're just gonna let this mixture sit. So I wanna toss it just to get the apples fully coated in the sugar. And sugar is hygroscopic, meaning it attracts water. So the sugar is going to pull the liquid out from the apples. And that's just going to help to kind of give us a head start on getting the filling to like thicken. Also, one thing about apples is, especially fresh apples like this, these apples are so tart. Have you ever had or so firm? Have you ever had an apple where like you bit into it and like, because you just ate it whole and like your gums hurt afterwards because it's so hard? Those are my favorite kind of apples. It first happened to me with this really amazing variety of apple called Gold Rush, which a friend of mine was like, you have to try these Gold Rush apples. We have 2 trees outside that are not really producing fruit yet. It's been a couple years, but it's such an amazing apple and I love it, but it's so firm. And what ends up happening with apple pie sometimes using fresh apples is that even if the pie bakes for 2 hours, it's not quite enough time for the apples to like fully soften. And when I have apple pie, I don't want the apples to have any crunch really. So not only is the sugar pulling out the water, but in doing so, it's going to soften the apples. So softening the apples not only produces that kind of silky, like, spoonable apple texture in the finished pie, but by kind of collapsing some of the cell walls and making the pieces like a little bit more flexible, I can fully compact the fruit filling when I assemble the pie. And that cuts down on air gaps, and then I don't get that thing that happens sometimes where you have like a big gap between the crust and the filling when the pie bakes. Because like if you just were to throw this into a pie, everything's going to kind of collapse in the oven, and then you have this big gap. So anyway, this just helps to make an apple pie that is picture perfect and has this better texture to the filling. Okay. So this is all combined. I'm gonna just let this sit. So you can see right now it looks kind of dry, like there's no liquid in the bottom. And as this sits, it's gonna pull out the juices and we're gonna get some pooling liquid in the bottom. So I'm gonna set this aside, and now I'm gonna turn to my cheddar crust. So I'm doing this in the food processor. I'm making apple pie is almost always a double crust pie. And I'm gonna do a bottom crust and lattice top just to make like a very, very classic looking apple pie. And so when you're doing 2 crusts, it's like a little bit greater volume of all the ingredients. And the key to crust is keeping everything really cold. So to that end, I'm doing it in a food processor because it's just much faster. But if you wanted to do it at home by hand, you totally can. You would just grate the cheese on a box grater and then follow my instructions where I show you how to make pie dough. But this just makes quick work. So I'm gonna start by grating my cheese, and I have the grating disc attachment onto my food processor. And this recipe calls for 4 ounces of cheddar cheese for the 2 crusts. So this is Kerrygold aged cheddar. I love it. It has such a kind of nutty, complex flavor, and it has a great kind of like semi-hard texture. It's so good in the crust. I recommend using a kind of like sharp, anything kind of aged, I think is gonna be really good. So this is a 7-ounce block. I'm gonna just kind of eyeball what I think 4 ounces looks like. And then this is gonna be such a good snack later with a little apple. Such a good combination. So I'm just gonna slice this in half and pass it through my food processor. Did I do this right? Oh, it's not plugged in. Huh. Okay. So I'm done with the grater. If you have any bits of cheese, you can scrape those off. And now I'm gonna put my blade in. I'm gonna add 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. It doesn't make it sweet. It does help to encourage browning. And so if you're making this, if you're gonna do like a savory pie or savory tart of some kind, still add the sugar. Then 2 teaspoons of diamond kosher salt. I always say if you use Morton's, use half that amount. And now I'm going to grab my Kerrygold butter. I have 2 sticks of unsalted butter that I cut into cubes, and it's been chilling. Because again, for any kind of like flaky crust of any kind, always keep things really cold. So here's that butter. That's going to go in. And this makes, it's such a great combination of like a very, very buttery crust and the kind of savory cheesiness from the cheddar. And also what's great about that added cheddar is it increases the tenderness of the crust too. So now I have some ice water. I need 2/3 of a cup. So I have ice water and then a separate measuring cup. I am going to pulse this mixture just to like barely break down the butter and to incorporate the cheese. But I do not want to break up the butter very much because I'm going to continue to process this after I add the water, and I don't want to over process it where those pieces are going to get really small, and I'm going to have, I still want pieces of butter and cheese to kind of make like little flaky pockets in there. So I don't want it to be too fine. So I'm just going to give it like a couple pulses. Okay, that's good. So you still want those pieces of butter really big at this point. And now I'm going to do my ice water. And I'm just going to kind of pour this over. And now I'm going to pulse. And I want to pulse until the butter is about between the size of like a lentil and a pea. And I have like evenly moistened crumbs. So this is not going to make like a ball of dough around the blade, because if I go to that point, it's a little too processed. So I just want to get the water distributed. So I'm going to turn everything out onto my work surface. One great thing about adding cheese to a dough like this is the cheese tends to increase, it makes it like non-stick, like it increases the fat content in the dough and also kind of gets in the way of like the development of gluten. So it makes it really, really tender. And it's the same thing when you add cream cheese to a dough. It just makes it easier to handle in a way. It just like doesn't stick to the surfaces easily. It's just kind of a great flavor enhancer and texture enhancer for a dough. I have this nice mixture of like evenly moistened crumbs. So here's like a pretty big piece of butter. I'm going to break that up a little bit. But the butter is a kind of different mixture of sizes, and that's really what you want. And the cheese has kind of broken down a little bit more because it's really the butter that's going to give the flakiness. I'm going to start by kind of just making sure everything is evenly mixed. Sometimes with a food processor, you'll get like a little pocket that's wet, you know, kind of. That's more if you like put the liquid first and then the dry ingredients, but just kind of making sure everything is evenly distributed. So I know this mixture looks really crumbly, but I know it has enough moisture in it because when I take a little fistful and I squeeze, it holds together. So now what I want to do is pat this down into a single mass. And I'm going to make a kind of square or rectangle, and I want to press firmly. This bench scraper is a really handy tool for this because you can help to like compress from the sides and get it into a pretty like squared off shape. Okay, and here's where also you can go in with your rolling pin to press everything. I want to get it down to about like at least a 1/2 inch thickness. And that's because we're going to do this kind of stacking where it's kind of like a quick lamination being that technique that makes all those flaky layers when you make croissants or danishes. And this kind of mimics that by stacking the dough on top of each other. And what happens is those bits of butter flatten into thin sheets. And what's great about Kerrygold butter is it tends to be pretty pliable without getting like soft. And so it flattens really easily, and it's just going to make a dough that's super, super flaky. So I'm going to start by cutting this into quadrants. And I'm going to stack the quadrants on a floured surface just so I don't get a lot of sticking on the surface. So I'm going to just move this guy over and then start stacking. If any little bits fall off, that's totally fine. Just stick them like in between the quadrants. So like this part fell off, just stick it right there. And the dough is still nice and cold, but if you're doing this at home and let's say your kitchen's really warm for some reason and it's just getting soft and the butter is softening, get it into the fridge or even the freezer for like 5 or 10 minutes and just let everything chill out. And it's just gonna make your life easier. Okay, so I have my stack. I'm gonna get it back to the center of my work surface on a little more flour. And now I'm gonna just press down. So again, we're taking all those like 3-dimensional pieces of butter and flattening them, making them a little bit more 2-dimensional. And that is what is going to create many, many layers of butter and dough, all these separations, and then it's gonna puff in the oven, and that's what's gonna make our flaky pie crust. So now I'm gonna just go in with my rolling pin. And this quantity is for 2 crusts. Like I said, apple pie is almost always a double crust. So I'm gonna cut this in half. I just wanna get it back into kind of a long rectangle. I had this part like, and I always make sure that it's not sticking to the surface. But again, that cheddar really helps to prevent sticking to the surface. Okay, so I'm getting this back out into a rectangle. And you can see that the dough is now holding together. And I'm getting these like streaks of butter, which is what I want to see. So I'm going to cut this in half. And now I have my 2 crusts. So the final step of assembling the dough is to wrap everything in plastic. And as I wrap in plastic, I like to kind of shape them into a little bit more of a disc or a round. And that's going to make rolling out a little bit easier. So I kind of like round off the corners a little bit. And I can continue to do that inside the plastic wrap.
Could you just cut these up and would it just be like cheddar biscuits?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it would probably need a little more salt, maybe a little more sugar. Oh, but there's no leavening in it. If you did this recipe just like this and you added like a few teaspoons of baking powder, you would have cheddar biscuits. Great. Okay, so there's one piece. So at this stage, you can use the plastic to kind of like round out this portion of dough. And then I like to wrap it really, really tightly. Then this step is a thing I've kind of always instinctively done and never really thought much about it, but it actually is so crucial, I've learned over the years. This step that I do where after wrapping it in plastic, I roll over it with the rolling pin. It forces the dough into the plastic under pressure, and it like really makes everything adhere so easily, and it really cuts down on the dough cracking or like falling apart when you go to roll it out. So really important step, highly recommend. So that's one portion. And here's the second one. It doesn't really matter very much if they're not exactly the same size. It's a pretty generous amount of dough. Like you'll have scraps pretty much no matter what. So don't stress too hard about if one is bigger than the other. These are done. You can see the bits of butter scattered throughout the dough. This looks great. So these are going to go into the fridge to chill. And you want the dough to have long enough in the fridge where the gluten kind of relaxes and the butter gets really hard. So at least 2 hours. If you can do it the night before, that's even better. So I'm going to stick this in. And then I already made some swaps of the dough last night for rolling out. And we're going to check on our apples. Turn back to the filling, and I'm going to show you a really cool step where I'm going to caramelize some cream. It goes really well with the cheddar. "30 minutes or so is about how long the apples have been sitting, and you can see there is a good amount of liquid in the bottom of that bowl. The volume has decreased a little bit. Like the slices have gone, like if I were to do this before when I cut it, it would break, but they've become a little bit flexible. And that's from the water being drawn out. And this is good. This is what we want to see. So longer is better for the filling. If you can let this sit for a couple hours, that's great, especially again using fresh apples. But we're going to move things along just in the interest of time. So I'm going to put together my final filling. I have those 2 ingredients I said I left out. I have some heavy cream and a couple of tablespoons of cornstarch. Cornstarch is my thickener. I'm going to caramelize the cream. I was thinking about what is the filling that I want with a cheddar pie crust with this like buttery, flaky, slightly savory, salty, like delicious pie crust. And I didn't want the kind of typical apple pie filling with like a lot of heavy spice. So I decided to caramelize cream in it, which is a really, really cool technique, very similar to browning butter. It's basically the same idea. I have a small saucepan. I'm gonna get this heating over medium. So cream has a higher proportion of milk solids compared to butter. And so when you brown it, you just get like more of those little toasty bits. So that's gonna kind of form the base for my filling. I'm gonna take a little bit of my liquid from my apples and I'm gonna mix it with the cornstarch to make a little bit of a slurry. Cornstarch is so fine that if you were just to add it to a liquid dry, it forms lumps that are really hard to get rid of. So you make something called a slurry where you basically kind of dissolve it in a little bit of liquid first. So I'm gonna add a couple tablespoons of the liquid and just stir it up with a fork. This is my cornstarch slurry. I'm gonna set this aside. I'm gonna add this at the end. I'm gonna add my cream to my saucepan. And what happens as the cream cooks is the liquid evaporates and it reduces, and eventually the mixture breaks, so it kind of separates into like butter, fat, and solids. And that's what we want. So I'm gonna really let this come to a boil, whisking occasionally. And you really want this at as high of a boil, just to help it go faster, as you can without it boiling all the way over. So my cream is reducing. Doesn't it smell cheesy? Do you smell that?
Yeah. I like cheese, yeah.
It just smells even better once it starts to brown, which it's already, you can see it's getting a little golden right now. It's almost become like semi-solid, and that is all the butter fat in there and the milk solids, and I'm just gonna cook this until it's golden brown. And I'm whisking because those milk solids on the bottom tend to stick, so I'm whisking to kind of keep them from sticking and burning. Here, I'm gonna turn this off now. So here's this mixture. It looks just like brown butter, but just more milk solids. So it's sort of a more intense version of brown butter, if you can even imagine it. It really smells cheesy. This is gonna taste so delicious with the cheddar, which already has this kind of like very complex nuttiness, and same thing with this mixture. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to sort of tip my bowl and pour all of this pooling liquid into the saucepan and reduce it again. So concentrating all the juices. Ooh, I'll pick those up. So just think of it this way, like I'm taking all of this water that otherwise would have been inside the pie, you know, making it much harder for the bottom crust to brown and kind of keeping it wet and soggy, and I'm thickening it beforehand. Ooh, okay. All right, so I'm gonna put this back on the heat. I'm gonna reduce this, I would say, by probably about 2/3, just until the juices start to thicken, and I'll know that when the bubbles start to like get bigger and a little bit slower to pop. That's how I know it's concentrating. And the whole idea is that we are driving off a lot of the water content of the apples. They're gonna continue to release liquid as they bake. So it's gonna just create a really nice, tight, glossy, juicy filling that's not gonna be very watery. So I have this mixture now. It's almost kind of syrupy. I am going to whisk in that cornstarch mixture. If it's been sitting for a little bit, give it another stir, because sometimes that cornstarch settles to the bottom. I am going to whisk this in. And now the key to cornstarch is it has to come up to a boil to activate the starches. And I'm gonna do that now because it just means that, like, it gives it such a head start, and it means that I don't have to worry too much about the internal temperature of the pie. Like, I already know that the cornstarch it's gonna get hot enough that my filling is gonna be set, basically. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this back up, and it's still pretty liquid. This is gonna get very, very thick because of those 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So keep whisking to prevent lumps. So brought it to a boil. I'm gonna turn it off. And now this whole mixture goes back into my bowl. What's nice about this too is that by adding the liquid and the cornstarch to that brown butter mixture, it re-emulsifies everything, so it's not like I have fat pooling on top. So you get this really nice, smooth mixture. So this is gonna go back into my bowl. Now I wanna toss this to coat the apples again. What I have are like coated apples and none of that pooling liquid in the bottom. This has to cool because that mixture was hot, so I'm gonna set this aside. I am going to prep my crusts to give this a chance to cool down, and then we're gonna assemble. I prepared a dough recipe last night as a swap. So here I have one portion. I'm gonna get some flour down on my surface. Anytime I'm rolling out any kind of pastry, I like to keep it moving on the surface quite a bit. So don't be too shy about adding flour as needed. And I also rotate it constantly. I do want to maintain somewhat of a round shape for lattice, but also something kind of oblong, like more oval shaped. And I'll tell you why. So my brain really likes a lattice that has 5 strips in either direction. So that just means I want to cut 10 strips from this portion of dough. So you're going for a thickness that's a kind of between a 1/4 inch and 1/8 of an inch, closer to an 1/8, just not too thin. So make sure that you don't have any sticking. That's why I like to keep it moving and also like flip it every so often. So now I'm gonna cut my lattice, my strips. So I have my wheel cutter here. I'm basically gonna get kind of 1.5 inch thick strips. You actually want a variety of lengths because as you get closer to the edge of the pie, you need a shorter strip, and the ones that go across the center need to be a little bit longer. So I'm gonna get a little bit of flour. I'm gonna lay down my strips. Now this dough is a little bit more delicate than your average pie dough, and that's because we have the addition of the cheddar. The cheddar kind of like physically gets in the way of gluten chains that are gonna kind of link up, and that is what creates structure and elasticity in the dough. And that's a good thing because it keeps it really tender. It just means it's a little bit more delicate. I'm gonna stick this in the fridge. Then I'm gonna grab my pie plate and my second portion of crust, and then we're gonna start assembling. Actually, before I do that, just so I know I'm totally ready, I should mention that my oven is on 425, that's preheating, and I'm gonna grab my demerara sugar, my egg, and a little splash of cream and make my egg wash, just so I'm all prepped for assembly. With fruit pie, it is always a process no matter what. Especially double crust, it's just like a lot. So make sure you have all of your little things that you need for assembly. I have my pie plate, my egg wash, my pastry brush, a pair of scissors, which is really useful for like trimming the outside of the crust. Because of the way I like rolled over the crust with the rolling pin, you don't get any cracking around the edges or like breaking off of any pieces. One thing that's really cool about the cheddar in the crust is anyone that's ever like baked a cheddar biscuit knows that the little pieces of cheese like brown really fast and get like super toasty, and so that happens in the crust. Like you get little specks of like toasty brown cheesiness as it bakes, which is so delicious. It was so funny. I was baking a pie last night, and Harris had like a work colleague over, and he was like, "It smells like Cheez-Its in here." I was like, "Oh, I'm baking a pie." Like you could smell pie smell. And then he was like, "It also smells like Cheez-Its." And I was like, "Yes, because the crust has cheese in it." So you get this great mix of flavors. So you can see on the surface where there's like little bumps. Those are the bits of cheese. This thickness is nice. I'm gonna just flip it one more time to make sure there's no sticking. If you feel like it is stuck, use that bang scraper to help you lift it up. I always like this trick of rolling it onto the rolling pin and then unrolling it back over the pie plate. All right, I'm done with my rolling pin. And now whenever you are making, I mean, all pies start with this step of like pressing, whether it's top, 2 crust or single crust, you always start with this step of pressing the bottom crust into the plate. And this is really important. What you want to do is let the weight of the dough kind of pull itself into that space where the bottom meets the sides, rather than stretching it. You want full contact between the crust and the pie plate all the way around. So I always take my hand and press really, really firmly. Like really work it in there and then up the sides. It's that contact and the heat conduction from the plate like pressing up against the crust that's going to help it brown. So now I'm going to add my apples. There's been a little bit of like extra liquid release since I added that cream, the cream mixture with the cornstarch, but it's all gonna kind of thicken in the oven. The apples have softened a bit, so it's gonna be a lot easier for me to get everything really compacted into the pie plate, and that's important because the more compacted you can get the filling before it bakes, the less of that air gap you're gonna have between the top crust and the fruit when it comes out. So sometimes I like to go and just make sure, like the bottom, I kind of take half the filling and really make sure that the apples are fitting into the crust in the bottom. Harrison and I were talking last night about like pies and why often they're not very good. And he was saying like he feels like my pies have a lot more filling in them, which I think is true. Like I like to really pack as much fruit in as I can, because that's the whole point of a fruit pie. It's like a celebration of seasonal fruit. And so that's one reason I love this technique, is because you can just fit so many apples into, and this is just a regular 9-inch pie plate, not even a deep dish. Now that I have, I would say like 90% of the apples in, I'm really, really pressing. And they've softened nicely, so they're fitting together pretty tight. You want this kind of nice, gentle mound of apples. Now I'm going to rinse my hands and grab my strips that I cut for the lattice that are chilling. Here's my chilled strips. I'm going to take my egg wash and just paint a little border around the lip of the pie plate. And this is going to help the strips of lattice to adhere to the bottom crust. So I start to build my lattice across the center. It's just, I don't know why, I just think it's easier that way. So I take a strip and I lay it right down the middle. Then I take, and make sure you're working with the long strips first. Again, you want the longer strips toward the center of the pie, and then as you get to the edges, you kind of taper. Then I'm going to take a second long strip and go 90 degrees right across. Then I start working down the sides. You can start from either direction. And also the most important part is you need to be weaving. Here, the strips going to my left and right. This one is under, these are over. So just keep in mind the woven pattern. So now I'm gonna go work the other direction, and I need to lift this one up, place one of the longer strips, and you can see how it's like an over-under all the way around. Okay, so let's put this guy, we're gonna do the same thing on this side, lift it up. And now I have 4 more strips left, and I have 4 more spots. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way around. So keeping that same over-under pattern, I'm gonna go like this, lifting up these guys, laying this one down. And just keep in mind that you know, just as you're working, like check your work, make sure that you're keeping things parallel and square. 2 more. This I gotta go under. This looks great. So now I'm gonna take my pair of scissors and I'm gonna trim away any excess dough on the strips, basically dough that goes beyond the rim of the pie plate. You know, there's always a risk with a double crust pie of making the edge just like very, very thick in a way that it doesn't fully bake through. So we wanna take off this excess. It's looking beautiful already. Now I want to just go around and press really firmly. And I want the crust to adhere to that egg washed border. The next step is to trim around my crust, the bottom crust that is, leaving about maybe a 1/2 inch or so all the way around. I need enough of a overhang to fold up and over, and then really no more. Like if I were to leave this full amount on here, it's just gonna be an excess of dough around the edges that I don't want. All right, so now I'm gonna fold the excess dough on the edge up and over. So I'm gonna egg wash the entire border, including the edges of the strips. And now, just using basically my 2 thumbs, and thumb on one hand and thumb and forefinger on the other, I'm gonna just fold this over. So the idea is that I have this double thickness layer of dough that's just resting on the rim of the pie plate. This looks great, and you could think like, well, you know, like why go further? I could stop here. The problem is that it's just a very thick layer of dough. And so what you want to do, the crimp actually is not just decorative. The crimp is there to increase the surface area and thin out that border so that it bakes evenly and it bakes through. So I like to flour my fingers. If it's getting really soft at this point, because maybe it's warm or it's been out for a long time, throw it in the fridge. And just let that edge set up a little bit. But I'm okay, I still have some work time here. So I'm gonna start, again, I do thumb on one hand and thumb and forefinger on the other, and I just make, I go around on an initial pass where I start to form this wavy pattern. And I like a kind of big, dramatic lattice. I think it's more effective at just like at exposing surface area of the crust. Then I like to go in and kind of pinch and just kind of define the crimp a little bit more and even out the thickness. And then I go back the other direction and like pinch the other way. Now what you want to avoid is a really thick layer of dough, and you also want to avoid a crimp that like hangs over the edge. And because this is such a tender dough, it just increases the chances of the dough basically like breaking off as it bakes and like, you know, hitting the bottom of your oven, detaching from the pie. That's definitely happened to me before. The other thing that happens is you lose definition in the crust. Like it might seem nice and kind of thin and even, but what happens is there's a souffling, like that kind of puffing in the oven, and so you lose the definition. So it might look like super wavy now, and when it comes out of the oven, it's just not gonna look quite as like linear in a way. I'm gonna do a final layer of my egg wash over all of the lattice and the crimped edge. And if you can, try to avoid areas inside the crimp where the egg wash pools. Those tend to be the areas that are gonna darken really quickly. So now I'm gonna do a sprinkle of some more demerara sugar on the surface and around the border. You can do as much or as little as you want. Obviously it looks pretty and it creates a kind of crunchy topping, and it's not a very, very sweet pie, so the extra sugar is a nice addition. Now, before I bake it, I do wanna get this into the freezer to have a chance to set, because the edge has gotten a little bit soft, and the colder it is going into the oven, the more you're gonna get this kind of dramatic puffing and like separating the layers and just the flakiness that you want. So 10 minutes in the freezer, and then it's gonna go into my oven, which is on 425. Ah! Oh my God. Is this gonna fit? Whoa, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Is it gonna fit? Oh my God, so close. Yes. So here's my not frozen solid, but very cold pie. 10 minutes in the freezer. The crust has set really nicely. I have it on a foil lined baking sheet, very important for catching drips because that will turn into smoke in your oven. My oven's on 425. I'm gonna get it in on the center rack, and it's gonna bake for 20 minutes at that high temp, and I'm gonna turn it down to 350. And the entire bake time, start to finish, will be between like hour 15, hour 45. So almost 2 hours until the crust is like super golden brown and I see bubbling juices. The pie has been baking for an hour and 25 minutes. It went 20 minutes at 425, and then it's been going at 350 the rest of the way. I checked on it probably a half an hour ago, and the rim, like the crimped edge, was getting a little dark, so I tinted it with some foil. But it's done. I'm gonna bring it out, and the way I know it's done is not only is the pastry really like deeply browned, but the juices are bubbling. So that's really what you wanna see. It smells like, doesn't it smell like Cheez-Its? So I'm gonna take off the foil, and I'm gonna get this onto my cooling rack, if I can. It's like super hot. The like really hard thing about fruit pie is like the bottom of the plate always just gets like so sticky and like buttery. So I usually clean it off after it's had a chance to cool for a bit. This is obviously extremely hot, and with fruit pie, you wanna really fully let it set, with any pie, truly. So I made one last night. Look, hold on a second. First, look at how good it looks. There's no air gap between the lattice and the apple, so classic looking. It smells amazing. It's incredibly hot, so we have to let it cool. So for any pie, you wanna let it set completely, like fully cool. That's gonna take several hours. And if you want your pie served warm, it's better to warm it up after it's cooled than to eat it like while it's hot. So I have one that I made last night, and that's the one we're gonna cut into. So I'm gonna set this aside, and we're going to taste. So here's the one from yesterday. It looks so beautiful. One thing you can see is like on the edge of that plate, see there's like little dark golden brown like polka dots along the crust. Do you see that? Those are those bits of cheese. So it's gonna give me like all that toasty, cheesy flavor. Super excited. All right, let's cut into it. There's certain desserts, like in England, there's a tradition of serving fruitcake with a side of like good cheddar. That's definitely something you could do here, or you could serve it with like a classic, whipped cream or something like that. But I think I'm just gonna try it plain because I wanna be able to appreciate the crust with the apples. So cutting through the pie, and this is why you wanna let it set. It's like there's no resistance from the apples. They are nice and soft. So whenever you're slicing, make sure you're cutting through that bottom layer of crust. And the idea here is that like you don't want the juices to like rush. They want to be thickened and set. So when I turn the pie around, you can see there's no juices like pooling in the bottom. Such like a classic looking slice of apple pie. Perfectly set, but because we used fresh apples that were not dried out like you get with cold storage apples, it's like they're still going to be juicy and delicious with that kind of soft, silky texture, which I really want, but totally intact. It's not like I made applesauce, and that's because we used a baking apple, like a really, really firm fleshed apple. I'm gonna get a little bit of crust. I love the kind of like hints of cinnamon in the filling, and actually get a good piece of crust. The crust has just some of that like savory saltiness, but not enough that you would think that like you weren't eating a pretty classic apple pie. Like you could still serve this for dessert. This in no way veers into like too savory territory. I think the crust just is there for that contrast, and they really complement each other so well. I think apple cheddar pie might seem like a strange concept to people, but it's really a classic apple pie that is enhanced with the kind of like salty, savory flavor of aged cheddar, specifically Kerrygold aged cheddar, which has like an amazing creaminess and complexity of flavor. And of course, Kerrygold butter in the crust, which is my go-to butter for all my pastry, but especially pie dough, because it's so easy to roll out. It just makes it so flaky and tender. And here we have a classic apple pie with like a little fun twist, perfect for the holidays. Try it at Thanksgiving. I think it kind of will give you like a little edge. I have a friend who enters in a pie competition with her family every year. I might tell her to make this one. I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.